All right, we're gonna welcome everybody in again. Thank you for the time and the attendance. We're Donor Voice, a behavioral science fundraising agency, and a big part of that behavioral science lens is recognizing what we all probably take for granted, and that is that people are different. And if people are different with different motivations and different rationale for support, we probably need to get in the business of matching our message to those people. That's what we call personalized matching, the what we say part. This session is not about that. You can find, again, on the Donor Voice YouTube channel, some webinars that we've done on that topic. We publish 3 times weekly in the Agitator blog and write kind of prolifically around personalized matching. So there's plenty of content there. Equally important to what we say is when we say it. That's personalized pulsing. People have a very strong kind of behavioral preference for when they interact with the brands. And matching up to that is a way to have our communication feel personalized above and beyond, or in addition to, the message.
The fundraising sector swears by RFM as the gold standard for selection: how much, how often, and when someone gives. But in practice, frequency and monetary value are ignored, and recency becomes the only lever. And it's not even a sophisticated lever. It has been reduced to a binary switch, in or out. And everyone who's in gets the exact same treatment, same message, same cadence. And then comes the cliff. Once the recency switch is off, for a certain donor, they drop off the cliff and they're out of your mailing stream. So think about day 365 and 366 here. One day they're receiving everything, and the next day, poof, they're gone. So this creates two equally concerning problems. On the one hand, irritation and over-solicitation for some donors, and on the other hand, under-solicitation and missed opportunity for other donors. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to honor their response rhythm. In every donor file that we've seen, we see these two audiences. These are names we came up with to describe their giving pattern. So mode of 1 donors are those who make just one gift a year. It doesn't matter how many times you ask them, they only give once every year. Responsive multiples are donors who make at least 2 gifts in the same year. And by the way, we're talking about calendar year. Donors don't think about it in terms of your fiscal year. Now, we may have come up with these names to describe the donor behavior, but we certainly didn't invent the audiences themselves. They're very real and they already exist in your CRM right now. We weren't looking for them. We didn't go hunting for them. They revealed themselves again and again every time we looked at any donor response data from client files and donor response files. Now, what you'll see in the next screen here is aggregated client data going back to 2016, as you can see. When we looked into those files, one thing became crystal clear. The current fundraising strategy, mail more, ask more, or recency is better, creates two big outcomes. First, most donors never give again. That's the column on the left. That's the solid majority. Here is 53%, and I'm going to reveal in a second how that plays out in more recent years. The next biggest group gives 1 time a year. Not 2 times, not 3 times, just once. That's mode of 1, and it's not a fluke. We see this time and time again in every donor file, in every sector. And then you have a small fraction of donors who make 2 gifts per year or more. Now, this pattern and these groups stay remarkably stable over the years. If anything, the never give again group has gotten worse. The percentage has climbed up, and we believe that's a direct side effect of the just send another ask approach, when in reality, that just increases irritation and attrition. Now, I'm gonna unpack mode of one, and then Kevin will take over and talk about responsive multiples. Now, focusing on mode of one for a second, here's what they look plotted out. The x-axis shows months since last gift. On the y-axis, you see the likelihood of giving again. Sector wisdom says the best time to ask for another gift is right after they made their first one. As you can see here with real donor data, that's actually the worst time to ask again. This group starts giving again when they approach what we call their anniversary month. They make one gift a year around the same time each year. Now, some people might see this as a weakness, this low frequency of giving. We see it as a strength. It's predictable. It's like a habit. And once you reinforce it and even automate it, you can make giving easier and more sustainable. To treat these donors differently, first you need to find them. Our analytics platform uses a set of business rules that help us identify who these donors are, but also they help us identify their most likely month to give, their anniversary month. And here you can see examples of donor patterns that do or don't qualify. The first one, they made one gift each year for the last 2 years, so they qualify. Donor B, they made one gift, and then the next year they made 2 gifts in that calendar year. They don't qualify as mode of one, they qualify as responsive multiples. Donor C, they gave once, and then the following years they didn't make any gifts. They are not mode of one, they're lapsed. The next one, donor D, in 3 years in a row, they gave once each year. That's the definition of mode of one. But finally, you also see donor E, they also qualify even though they skipped a year. They're still active, and their preference is to make a gift in one single gift in a calendar year, so they qualify for mode of one. Now that we have these donors flagged as a separate audience, we can build a strategy around them. And that strategy centers on what we call anniversary halo. When our analytics platform identifies their most likely month to give, we send 3 appeals. One the month before, one in their anniversary month, and one the month after. That's the halo. The rest of the year, we don't go completely dark, but we don't push for gifts either. We send out stewardship communication, opportunities to engage through actions, if that's available, brand ads to keep the relationship warm, but we don't try to convert them before they're ready to give again. Instead, we align to their rhythm. When it's time to ask and we send out these appeals in the anniversary halo, we acknowledge their pattern of giving right from the start. I don't know if you can read the copy on the outer envelope, but it says one gift every year, quietly powerful. And then on the back, we noticed will follow your lead. And then on the back, it says your annual gift speaks volumes. Make it now, you're all set for the year. This isn't supposed to be final copy and you should copy and paste that and do it for everyone. It's just an illustration to show that we want them to know that we've noticed and we appreciate how they prefer to give. The letter can be exactly the same. And you can insert, what we typically do, we have a footer or an insert that further highlights their habit and shows the difference they make. And of course, you can do that across channels. It doesn't stop with direct mail. In addition to tailoring the message, we also push mode of one donors to auto-renew. Online, it's quite simple. They can make that choice or tick a box. I want this gift to annually recur. But even in direct mail, we can do that through EFT. And this is a chess move. Converting them to annual recurring donors locks in retention. Annually recurring gifts typically have a retention between 75 and 80%. I'll wrap up the mode of one section with this case study. This client had a renewal program aimed at getting another gift from last year donors. That's basically their mode of one audience. They just didn't call it that. Their strategy, they had a five-part renewal series. That was built on the flawed logic that you ask more, you get more. The first thing we did was to cut it down to 3 touch points, as we discussed earlier. Did that reduce conversion? The opposite. We saw a lift in both response and ROI. There's build on that.
Great. Thank you for that. All right. Now we're going to talk about this other cohort, smaller but not insignificant, who has, at least on occasion, chosen to give more than once a year. And want to start by noting or referencing back to Kiki's point that most organizations that we see aren't even using F or M. They're just using R, and it's extremely crude. It's a binary cut point, and we have this fall off the cliff moment. Having said that, it's possible. There are some charities and some agencies who are making better use of that recency, frequency, and monetary value data. And they're doing that by building a statistical model. And that is certainly better than just using recency and having that recency cliff. However, the vast majority of those models that we've seen for selection, who's in and who's out, they are comparing donor A to donor B, or in our little riff here, they're comparing Jill to Jack, and they're doing it at a single point in time. So it's a static model. And even if you're using fancy machine learning and they're going to slap AI on the model, it's typically still and forever a ranking exercise because it's static and it's looking at Jill in relation to Jack. And the consequence of this is ultimately the same as that recency cliff and only using R. We wind up over soliciting Jill and we under solicit Jack. And if we're trying to personalize our approach to constituents, why are we going to subject Jill to this onslaught of appeals just because Jack can't get off his lazy ass and go up the hill and get a bucket of water or donate? And I joke a bit, but this is exactly what's happening with modeling that is, in the end, a ranking exercise and static in nature. So how do we go about fixing this? Well, we're going to need a model that's built just for Jill. There are two different ingredients that we need in order to fix the problem of over and under solicit and the lack of personalization in the cadence. One of the things that you have to have is promotion history. The RFM modeling that I was just describing, where it is forever and always a ranking exercise, is because those models are only using transaction history. They're only using the RF and M. So step one is you have to include promotion history in the modeling exercise. Now, there's another important ingredient to get to a better answer on when we solicit Jill that doesn't involve comparing her to the slacker Jack. If you have our contacts, which is the promotion history, when did we solicit Jill? And you have the response data, which is that transactional information. That's only ever going to produce a yes or no on a spreadsheet, and we translate the yeses into various financial metrics. What's missing from that analysis and from most modeling is how those contacts and solicitations actually change Jill. And this is where we have to bring in some evidence-based theory into our modeling. You can't just get a bunch of data and throw it into a machine. You have to be able to have some theory or rationale on why people do what they do and some larger lens onto how marketing and fundraising actually work. And so what we know is that each touch, each solicitation, this cuts across channels. This is not just mail. Each one has a positive and a negative. Each touch can build goodwill. Goodwill is brand memory and the readiness to act, or at least increase the probability that I'll act down the road. It's a positive feature of these solicitations. Equally true is that solicitations have a negative effect. They can create irritation. They also create just inattention. And once inattention sets in, you have a really hard time disrupting that. Both of these effects are very real, the positive and the negative, building goodwill and staying in their memory and creating those connections between the brand and the person and showing that you're still out there doing a good job. Equally real is irritation and tune out. They're also cumulative. And importantly, they're measurable. And so we have to model these forces explicitly in our modeling exercise. The wonky math can be pretty simply deconstructed, but you have to account for these patterns, these things that are happening in the real world in order to get a better answer on when do I solicit Jill. So this model can be very simply deconstructed. We have the ultimate question, which I'm trying to answer, is should we mail Jill or not on this next turn? That is a function of the goodwill kind of carryover. How much goodwill have we established with Jill? And that baseline effect, meaning kind of her general disposition toward the charity, is pretty darn high. So that's good. But by extension, it means that the added goodwill that we're likely to get with the next appeal is pretty darn low because her goodwill is probably pretty high as sort of a baseline effect. And then we have to factor in the negative part. If we send this next appeal, are we going to increase irritation and attention? And so the conceptual thing that we are answering, which is the part that ought to make sense and really be crystal clear, is that the only time that I want to mail somebody is when my predicted incremental gain, not response rate, is greater than the irritation cost. Otherwise, don't do it. So when you build a model that has promotion history plus transaction history, and when we take into account the very real cumulative effects of mail or any other marketing, fundraising, outreach, which again are both positive and negative, this is the worldview that I want. This is the personalized nature of cadence. I want a model that is addressing Jill and only Jill. Gone from this equation is Jack. And also very important is it has to be temporal, which means over time. It's no longer static. I need to understand her behavior tomorrow conditioned on what she did today. And so conceptually, this looks like what you're seeing reflected here. We are modeling her behavior over time, and we are then adjusting our decision-making criteria on do we hold or do we mail based on her behavior. So in this instance, which is a very real illustration, at the beginning of the calendar year, we are going to model out the 12 months of the year and predict when we ought to mail Jill, conditioned on when historically we have solicited Jill and how she's responded to that. So it's a model that is at the individual level. And then we have this set of predictions, and it's very simple. It's the 12 months rate. In this case, we've kind of consolidated that to seasons. And we're going to mail in the spring. She responds. The model recalibrates itself because even though Jill is a pretty good donor overall, she's a horrible choice for the summer mailing if she just gave. And that's where all the other modeling that we've described, whether it's recency off a cliff or RFM statistical modeling, is always going to let you down. It's going to over solicit Jill because it's going to take the check received as a positive signal to keep soliciting her, when in fact, it's the opposite signal that we should be receiving. Here is what the modeling looks like in CRM spreadsheet view. Very simple, very easy. It's visual. This is real data. These are constituent IDs. And for each donor, each human being, we've got the 12 months arrayed for our future forecast as we try to allocate and budget and plan for the year. And 1 means we mail, and 0 means we don't. And lastly, here's some proof that the model is actually doing a good job. What you're seeing here, the red dots are individual donor predictions. And they're arrayed on the x-axis with time, so month. And for the y-axis, it's gift or no gift. So it's binary. It's a 1 or a 0. And so the X's, the red X's, are oriented top to bottom. If it's towards the bottom, like you can see most of the red X's, it means it's toward the 0. And that probability cut point of 0.5 is what the yellow line is reflecting. These are low probability likelihoods that they're going to give, hence no mail for these people. And the blue line reflects actual behavior. So by definition, every blue dot, which is a blue human being, not a blue human being, it's a blue dot that represents a human being, lives either on the 1 or the 0. They either gave or they didn't. And as you can see, most of the blue dots, X's, live on the 0 line, which should match up with our reality because the vast majority of people don't give when we ask for money. The ones that are up here represent the giving behavior. And you can see the pattern holds with what you would expect. We start to see a lot more blue X's on the 1 line as we get towards the end of the year compared to other times of the year. Importantly, what you see for the red X's that are above the 50% probability line, that there's often a corresponding blue X. That means that we are correctly predicting the people who are going to give. These are the folks that we're going to mail, these 3 X's in this case for that month of May. And we can see that we've got 3 or 4 people up here. So we're doing a very good job of finding those people who are likely to give in any given month. Um, that kind of covers all of the main points that we wanted to cover today. And I can't underscore enough that it seems very familiar to us that we would ideally want to segment to try to tailor the message, and whether that personalization is superficial or more robust. We seem to assign value to that, the idea that we ought to personalize the message in some form or fashion. It's equally important to personalize the cadence part of this because that behavioral rhythm that folks have is very real, and it requires at the start recognizing you've got 2 audiences, those people who only ever give once a year, and your attempt to change that behavior is going to be met with disappointment. It is very well locked in, and we need to abide by it. We should be satisfied that they're highly satisfied with their annual giving. And as Kiki noted, trying to lock that in to auto renew is a massive lift in your overall lifetime value. Equally important for those people who are going to be the smaller subset, but not unimportant given their financial value and their lifetime value, the responsive multiples. You've got to get promotion history in the mix, and you've got to have just an ounce of theory that acknowledges the positive and negative features of marketing, which is goodwill on the one side and irritation on the other. Kiki, anything else you wanted to share, or should we dive into questions? Do we have any that are worth kind of teasing out?
small note that this is their personal preference on how they want to support this mission. It doesn't reflect how much they care or don't care about the mission. It's just maybe linked to their capacity or other personal circumstances. This is how they prefer to support you, and trying to convince them to do otherwise or give more frequently is a lost cause. The best thing you can do is accept it and acknowledge their behavior and make it easier for them. That's just an additional note, that it doesn't signal how much they care about the mission.
Yes, there are lots of people in high commitment by our measure, which is the measure of that relationship strength, their attitudinal kind of connection to the brand. Very high commitment, only ever going to give once a year.
Yeah.
Those are two very strong preferences they have. They love the organization. They want to be committed to it mentally, and they want to be a loyal supporter financially, but only on their terms.
Mm-hmm.
How do you convert a 1x donor into a 2x per year donor? Well, I can tell you that the current approach to that is we just bury them in solicitations. It's ask more, make more. That is a wildly flawed approach. So I would argue, we would argue that your much better financial return, much better, is to acknowledge the 1x a year donor and get that person on auto renew and reduce your spend against them. Okay, that is a sea change win financially for the file. Then, and only then, once you've identified this cohort, you've got them on a solicitation cadence that matches that behavior, and we are now getting our one time a year gift with 3 solicitations instead of 14 or 16 or 20, which is exactly what happens now. First of all, you've reduced the irritation for those people. You've decreased the chance that they'll stop giving. And then if you have them on auto renew, you've got an 80% retention rate baked in. Then, but start there. Then you have this audience identified, and some portion of them will be on auto renew. Make it your life's mission to get as many as possible on auto renew using all sorts of channels, text, phone, you name it, to make that request. With that cohort, there is opportunity to contact them, not every day, not every month, once a year, and see if they're willing to increase the amount that they're giving. So if they're on a $100 a year auto renew, might they want to increase that? Or yes, possibly increase that to twice a year. But you have to provide some rationale, and it ought to be contextually arrived at. So find your brand, figure out what on the calendar makes sense, that has you've got some real connection to it. If it's a religious charity, it's religious holidays. If you can come up with whatever the linkage is, but have some rationale for why you want them to give twice a year, and you'll increase the chance they actually do it. But what you shouldn't do is think that the current industry approach, burying people in solicitations, is going to, across channels, by the way, is going to work. It's a fool's errand, and it has a very big negative consequence, not just for those people, for all of those donors. What else do we have here? How do you model new donors? Yeah, that's a good point. So when we think about categorizing people based on their behavior, we've talked about motive one today and responsive multiples. The third audience, which we aren't going into great depth today, but we will have a webinar session, I'm sure, on, is the new donor cohort. So how do you model new donors? New donors require a very specific journey that is, in our view, kind of abiding by the medical profession's do no harm. What we know is that the standard kind of operating procedure for new donors is, for most charities, is just throw them into the deep end of the pool, bury them in stuff, and have sort of a hope strategy that they stick around. We know that most new donors don't give again. So that feels like something we need to protect ourselves against and try to have a journey that is going to try to avoid that really massive negative, most likely consequence of never give again. Then recognize and accept the reality that if the new donor is going to give again, the most likely chance for their behavior pattern is once a year. So we have a very specific journey that is tied to the psychology of giving and having touch points that are delivering on that psychology for new donors, but it definitely abides by those hard, cold realities of what the current sort of volume model has produced and a do no harm adage of trying to avoid having them wind up in the lapsed bucket where the vast majority wind up today, and recognizing, accepting, and being satisfied with the next most likely outcome after not give again is once a year. What else do we have in here? Kiki, you want to pick one? And
I just answered one. I typed the response about emergency appeals. What happens then? My response was emergency when an emergency happens, donors in a way expect you to do something about it, and they also react differently to emergency communications than they do to standard appeals. Emergency asks don't increase irritation as much. There is a solid reason why you're asking for a gift. So yes, we can keep those in when there is an emergency. Another question is, how do you identify the annual giver versus multiple giver without asking regularly, at least for a limited time? Well, right now we already have a bunch of data from previous years to identify mode of one and multiple givers. Then for new donors is what Kevin just talked about. Is there anything else you'd like to say on that, Kevin?
well, I think it's a fair point, and it does require recognizing that you need a new donor strategy because chances are your current new donor strategy is not very good, meaning that there's very high attrition and quitting after that first gift. And if new donors are every charity's biggest pain point because it's where all the loss is occurring, and improving that new donor retention rate is win number one. And then, yes, there is a period where we're not entirely sure where this new donor who has given their second gift is going to net out. Are they going to kind of right size into mode of one? If I was betting in Vegas, that's absolutely what I would bet because that's the most likely outcome. And so you could do a lot worse than new donor goal is getting them to become this mode of one donor on auto renew. You would have a massive improvement in your financial health if you treated every new donor as a mode of one donor and and ignore the possibility, even though it exists, that they might be willing to give twice a year. It's a pretty rare occurrence, by the way, the people who are giving multiple times a year and doing it every single year consistently. It's a bit of a unicorn. And we built this entire fundraising apparatus around the unicorn, and we're in a lot of ways suggesting we need to recalibrate our expectation here. Let's see, what else do we have? Kiki, does DV build models for orgs that are not full service clients of Donor Voice? Yes is the short answer. We could run all of this for an organization that is not a full service AOR client for Donor Voice and provide the mode of one part and the responsive multiple modeling. So hopefully that answered that question.
Have you looked at how stewardship actions, in particular thank you calls, donor impact reports with reply envelopes, affect chance of moving from one gift to two gifts? These touch points were also included in the analysis for the mode of one and response multiples. So whether it was a stewardship mailing, it was counted as in the promotion history, and then whether a gift was received or not was also counted. Kevin, is that right?
Yes. If an organization has not kept promotion history and has only transaction history, what steps can they take now while they begin building promotion history? Well, it has to exist. I mean, that promotion history file, maybe it's not stored or maybe the agency took it, but if you have the printer knows who they mailed. So I would think trying to recreate that is not impossible. Um,
How do you stay top of mind? Would you consider an appeal an impression? Yes, an appeal can be an impression, and not anything that goes out, brand ads, take an action, anything, any communication with your brand logo is an impression.
how should you think about varying stewardship touch points for varying groups? How do you know if you might be overly stewarding to the point that it's creating irritation and inattention? You want to answer that?
Um, yeah, first of all, we're not, as you've all understood. We don't favor frequent solicitation or communication. That goes for stewardship. We don't advocate for sending stewardship communications every month. That also can be pulsed so that each one stands out. Habituation is real. Any signal becomes noise, and then you start ignoring it after a while if it's repeated. So we don't want that to happen with our communications, and that's why we space them out.
Yeah, and I would just kind of tie that into the concept of goodwill. One of the things that we know about goodwill, which that formula spoke to, it has some staying power. So if you stopped soliciting, some of the folks that have been on your file tomorrow, they wouldn't forget you the next day. And so that's aspect number one. Goodwill has some staying power. So if you have a touch point whose job is to promote goodwill and show that you're still doing good work and that they should feel connected to the brand and that their 20 bucks is doing a good job, that has some staying power. Number one, you don't have to send that same message tomorrow or even next month for that to have done its job. And the other thing we know about goodwill is that when you do send the next stewardship touch point, and again, we strongly encourage having some white space on the calendars because it's 12 months doesn't mean we need to send that stuff out 12, 24, 36 times a month. Once you do send something out, it takes very little time. If the goodwill has dissipated a little bit, you're not sort of, it takes very little time, and that second touch point will do it to bring them right back where they started on the goodwill part. Okay. So, and recognize that goodwill and filling that up is the whole purpose of fundraising and marketing. It doesn't mean they're always going to give. It just means that we've kind of increased the probability that maybe they give today, but they're more likely also to give tomorrow. But the irritation part, I cannot underscore enough. We just want to tune that part out as if all of our messaging, communication, stewardship solicitation is giving people a chance to express themselves and give on their own timeline. No, it has a very real negative consequence, irritation and inattention. And if you don't account for that, well, we're not accounting for that as a sector. That's in part why the retention rates are so god awful.
How much data time does it take to identify which category someone falls into? And then another reference to the new donors. Um, it takes the promotion history file and their giving response data. So not much time at all. The model we've built, it runs automatically, so it shouldn't take a lot of time to identify these donors and flag them in the CRM. Kevin, anything you'd like to add?
No, other than just kind of reinforcing the new donor kind of reality, which is that our biggest problem is a major, major negative one, and they don't give again. So we should assume that whatever we're doing as a control for the sector or kind of as a control within your current world, it's not very good. It's subpar. It is not, we need some very different answer. You can't tinker at the margins and expect that you're going to have a material impact on new donor retention. And tailoring the message matters, tailoring the cadence matters. And I would strongly encourage getting very comfortable with the idea that the most likely outcome in the success category is them giving once a year. And we could do a heck of a lot worse if we treated every new donor, and our job with every new donor is to get them to once a year giving. Again, the vast majority of them don't give again. And even the second gift, there's a great kind of just false belief that the second gift is somehow the key to success. The data that Kiki was sharing on new donor, like what happens after the first gift, and you saw the majorities in the high 50s or low 60s who never give again. That's because we've got a much more extended window than what is typically talked about with first year retention. Meaning that typically you see sector stats on first year retention, what percentage give in the second year, and it's 20%, 25%. It's really awful. And that's a problem. Having said that, if you extend the window out 24, 36 months past first gift, the number goes down. The percentage who don't give again goes down. It's closer to 60%-ish, your mileage will vary, who never give again. So not only does the second gift not have to come really quick, it's not really a hallmark of success. If you have 60% of people who never give again, that number often jumps to 75%-ish after the second gift, meaning 15% of we got to add 15% into our lapsed pool, and they made a second gift. So we should not consider that some hallmark of success. We should not think that we have to get the second gift early. That is just a flat out misconception, and it just breeds the frequency model of ask early and often. So I want people to get comfortable with the idea that it is a huge win of success to get your new donor locked into this habit of giving once a year.
There is one about over solicitation overall across organizations. So not within any one organization's control, but I imagine that they tune out due to over asking, not specific to one organization, but rather as a result of many organizations asking too often. A donor may get too much mail instead of responding to all asks. Is there any way to consider this? Yes, you're right. Over solicitation across nonprofits creates this aggregated load, but donors don't tune out everything equally. First of all, they're going to tune out mailings or messages from organization and mission they don't have any connection with. So that's out of the door. They don't think about it. They don't pay attention to it ever again. But then even with the mission, where they have a connection, their identity, as we call it, they're going to pay attention to it. But once they give and they feel like they can't give anymore, receiving additional mailing that doesn't align with their rhythm of giving leads to inattention. And that's where you have control over. You can align the cadence to make it stand out, to make it relevant, respectful, meaningful for them.
Yeah, I mean, I get the instinct, and I've heard this rationale that we've got to be out there constantly because these donors, we're renting these names. It is the grossly overfished pond, which is a very accurate metaphor, and that we need to match the other groups who are mailing these same names. And I get the instinct. It does not work out well. That external problem of you renting names and then those people being buried in solicitations from other groups is beyond your control if you're going to rent those names, and pretty much everyone is renting those names. But to think that we've got to sort of match like this mini nuclear arms race and that's our path to success is guaranteed to lead to higher irritation and tune out with those supporters. Because as Kiki noted, they're not giving inattention and tune out kind of equally across the board. There is some opportunity to stand out from the crowd. Recognizing that macro environment ain't great, but you're not gonna fix that.
Well, you can also fish outside that pond, but that's a different conversation and webinar.
that is very true. Yes, that's a better option.
Are there any different considerations you recommend for small local agencies with a small file? I don't think so. I mean, I don't, I can't think of a reason why the strategy should be different for a smaller file. Personal rhythm and giving preference is about the individual, not how many people are in the file.
Yeah, I guess my only suggestion would be just focus on the mode of one, because maybe what's left isn't, worth,
Mm.
modeling.
Mm.
If you have to pay an outside agency, whether it's us or somebody else, for modeling fees, and you've got a really tiny universe, yeah, the math is hard. But fortunately for you, your biggest chunk of people is the same as the large organization's biggest chunk of people. It's mode of one. That's a very easy audience to identify. For the small group that doesn't have kind of some data analyst, use one of the LLMs. They're really good. And contrary to popular opinion, if you put your file in there in a paid environment for GPT at like $20 a month, that data is not, I underscore, not shared with the evil intergalactic entity. So you're not risking anything privacy wise there. And then ask it to identify those names that are abiding by that behavior. Upload 5 years of transaction history and ask it to identify that mode of one audience. You could do a heck of a lot worse than that approach, identifying those people, and then identifying the most likely month. And again, you could have GPT do this for you, um, and abiding by that 3 cadence mailing that we suggested. I will tell you that in our kind of larger agency work, yes, we are identifying the universe of mode of one people who don't give after that 3 solicitation set of touch points. And we do have, follow-up kind of tactics for those people. And so you could also incorporate that. Who are the people that after I sent the 3 touch points didn't give again?
One more question. What platform do you currently use to identify and segment different given cadences?
Yeah, so it's a custom, data warehouse deal. But like I said, at least for mode of one, you could get GPT to do it. It's business logic. It's not complicated math, and GPT can actually do complicated math too. So you'd be a lot worse off than just in a kind of DIY mode, focusing on mode of one and having GPT do it for you. The other model, I would grant, is a bit more involved and not something that GPT could pull off unless you had some, you know, analyst that was attuned to all of that. There's a mode of one giving pattern and argument for using a membership model. Um, we've done a lot of work with in the conservation space, as a for instance, where that is a very common thing to refer to those donors as members. And we have done analysis and insights work where we found for some of those groups that member label, which is an identity. I mean, it's a light identity. It's kind of superficial in that anybody could call them a member, i.e., every other conservation group on the planet. And we all know that those people are getting mailed by all of the conservation groups because they're in that overfished pond. But we have done analysis, and this kind of gets to the can we stand out and be different, where some of those groups have done a good job of having that label actually mean something to the person, where they assign value to, even though it's superficial, the member label. Other groups, not at all, where we have recommended just get rid of the member language. So there's 2 things going on. It's that, does that member label mean something to them kind of intrinsically, or can you create a membership experience that makes that membership term mean something to them? That's sort of separate and apart from the mode of one thing. Having said that, yes, there is then the need/opportunity, because we have the expectation that if it's a membership, it's kind of on an annual pattern. Get them on auto renew. I will say that the idea that and most of the conservation groups fall down here too. They have their renewal series. And because most of the agencies that are supporting them operate on a volume model, the only thing better than the 3-part renewal, member renewal, is a 4-part, and then a 5-part, and then a 6-part. And then, oh, on top of that, I'm going to send out 8 things that I call appeals. Internally, I label them appeals. And the convoluted machinations behind the scenes on whether this donation was to an appeal counts as my member renewal. In that research that I'm talking about, there is mass confusion and irritation around the membership model. So I think it can have value, but you can really muck it up pretty quickly if we just treat it as a superficial thing and we think that it's permission to send out a ton of member renewals along with a ton of appeals. You're not fooling anybody, and the retention rates don't lie. They're awful. So um, I think membership can have its privileges, to quote American Express. It can also just be a superficial ruse that people see right through. Um, okay. Any other open questions? All right, 9:53. We have officially sucked up enough oxygen and taken enough of your time. We thank everybody for taking the time to join us and for the questions, which were fast and furious and great, all thoughtful questions and important ones. So again, thank you for the time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.